The Young and the Restless spoilers. The quiet hum of the Los Angeles night pressed against the wide windows of the hotel bar where Holden sat, his gaze lingering on Clare with a strange mixture of recognition and curiosity that seemed to unsettle even him. She was radiant but not in a polished way, her beauty carried something sharp, something fragile, as though she were the reflection of a memory he couldn't fully grasp. When he murmured that she reminded him of Sienna, he didn't expect the weight of that comparison to stay with him for the rest of the evening. Clare moved with the same subtle grace, the same reserved strength that Sienna had mastered years ago, a quiet defiance hidden behind soft eyes and deliberate composure. When Clare disappeared into the ladies' room, Sienna approached, drawn by the same strange energy that had unsettled Holden. She asked about Clare, pretending it was casual curiosity, but her voice carried a tremor of unease. Holden's reply was both guarded and revealing. He called Clare intelligent, unpredictable, difficult to read, much like himself. Sienna smiled faintly at that, but something flickered behind her eyes, a silent question she couldn't yet bring herself to ask. When Clare returned, the moment felt charged, almost conspiratorial. She teased Holden about being mysterious, admitting that understanding him might be a challenge she was ready to accept. What none of them said aloud hung thick in the air. There was something more than coincidence connecting them. The next morning at the Abbott estate, tension built like a storm that refused to break. Kyle stood in the living room, his determination radiating through every impatient gesture as Diane tried to reason with him. She reminded him that Harrison had just returned from Italy and that perhaps it wasn't the right time for him to chase ghosts or reopen wounds. But Kyle's mind was already in Los Angeles. He couldn't shake the thought of Clare, couldn't bear the idea of her being close to another man, especially someone like Holden, whose charm hid too many secrets. Diane's words barely reached him, and Jack's calm attempts to temper his son's obsession only fueled the fire burning in him. Jack warned that Clare might not welcome his sudden reappearance, that perhaps Holden's relationship with her was different than Kyle imagined, but the younger man refused to listen. His heart was a battlefield of love and pride, tangled with the fear of being forgotten. He said that Holden could never love Clare the way he did, that no one else deserved the laughter and softness she had once shared with him. It wasn't just jealousy, it was possession disguised as devotion, desperation cloaked in longing. As Kyle's plane took off the next morning, Genoa City seemed to fade behind him like a place from a forgotten dream, replaced by the restless anticipation of seeing Clare again. He imagined what he would say, how he would look at her, how she might respond. But beneath those imagined reunions was a darker curiosity, a whisper that maybe Holden's remark about Clare resembling Sienna wasn't mere coincidence. The more Kyle thought about it, the more he wondered why the resemblance was so uncanny. Sienna's past was full of omissions, half-truths, and sudden disappearances, and she had always been protective when questions about family came up. Clare, on the other hand, had grown up believing she was unwanted, a woman with a fractured past, pieced together through stories that never felt complete. Could it be that the woman she admired was the one who had abandoned her long ago? Holden, meanwhile, sat alone later that evening, turning over the same thought in his mind. He had noticed something in the way Sienna looked at Clare, a flicker of fear, a silent recognition that went beyond casual observation. He had known Sienna long enough to recognize her tells. The tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers fidgeted with her bracelet when she felt cornered. She had always guarded her past fiercely, and Holden had respected that boundary, until now. If Clare truly was connected to her in ways neither of them could yet admit, then his interest in Clare wasn't just romantic curiosity, it was the beginning of an unraveling that could destroy them both. He wasn't sure why he felt protective of her, or why he found himself studying her expressions, her laughter, her silence, searching for fragments of Sienna that might confirm the suspicion he didn't want to name. Back in Genoa City, Diane couldn't shake her anxiety. She knew Kyle's determination too well, and she feared that his trip to Los Angeles would end not in closure but in humiliation. Her maternal instinct told her that Holden wasn't an ordinary rival. His connection to Sienna and Clare's growing involvement in his life spelled danger. Jack tried to reassure her, but even he sensed something strange in the timing of everything. The coincidence of Clare's arrival in Holden's life and Sienna's resurfacing felt orchestrated, as if some hidden truth was forcing itself into the light. They both agreed that Kyle's obsession could make him reckless, that love, when mixed with fear, could be the most destructive force of all. At the hotel, Clare stood at her window, staring at the city lights below. She replayed Holden's words in her mind, unsure why they mattered so much. When he said she reminded him of Sienna, something in her stirred, a faint, buried ache that she couldn't explain. She had always felt drawn to Sienna, long before meeting Holden, almost like an invisible thread had connected them. Sienna had taken an unusual interest in her, offering guidance and affection that went beyond mentorship. There were moments when Sienna's gaze lingered too long, filled with emotion Clare couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't romantic, it was something deeper, almost maternal. Clare tried to dismiss the thought, but the resemblance between them was undeniable, and every time she caught her reflection, she saw traces of a woman she barely knew but somehow belonged to. Sienna, alone in her own room that same night, stared into her mirror and whispered Clare's name. She had spent years hiding the truth, constructing a version of her life that erased the one secret she could never forgive herself for. Giving up her daughter had been the price of survival, the consequence of a youthful mistake tangled in betrayal and power. She had told herself Clare was better off, that she would never find out, but destiny has a cruel way of circling back. Now fate had placed her face to face with the very child she had abandoned, and the universe seemed determined to punish her silence. She had seen the way Holden looked at Clare, and it terrified her, not because she was jealous, but because she feared history was about to repeat itself. When Kyle arrived in Los Angeles the next morning, his arrival set off a quiet ripple through the delicate balance already hanging between Holden, Clare, and Sienna. He found Clare at the hotel cafe, her expression unreadable as she greeted him. She had expected this, some part of her had known he would come, but his presence still unsettled her. Holden appeared moments later, and the tension between the two men was palpable, unspoken but electric. Sienna, sensing that the situation was about to spiral out of control, watched from a distance, her pulse quickening as the past she had buried began to claw its way back into the present. Holden's instincts told him that everything was connected, the way Sienna had avoided his questions, the way Clare's past was full of missing years, the way Kyle's obsession bordered on madness. Each of them was being pulled by invisible strings toward a truth none of them were ready to face. Sienna's mask was cracking, and Holden began to see glimpses of the woman beneath the poise. Guilt, regret, and a desperate need to protect something she still refused to name. Clare, caught between two men and a mystery she didn't understand, began to question everything she thought she knew about herself. Kyle, driven by love but blinded by pride, could not see that the woman he wanted to possess might soon belong to a story much darker than either of them imagined. By the time evening fell again, the air around them felt suffocating with anticipation. Holden stood by the bar, watching Clare and Sienna exchange glances across the room, one curious, one trembling. He realized then that he had stumbled into something sacred and forbidden, a secret that had survived years of silence. Sienna's eyes pleaded for him to stay quiet, to let her keep her illusion intact, but Holden couldn't. He had lived too long hiding truths of his own to watch another generation drown in the same deception. When he finally spoke, his words were soft, but they shattered the fragile calm between them. Clare's world tilted as the possibility she had always sensed took shape, and Sienna's carefully constructed life began to collapse. The revelation wasn't immediate, but the truth had already started its slow, inevitable descent. As Kyle stood outside the hotel later that night, watching Clare retreat from both Holden and Sienna, he realized he had lost her, not to another man, but to a secret that neither of them could compete with. Inside, Sienna wept for the daughter she had never raised, for the love that had come too late, and for the man who had unknowingly exposed her greatest sin. Holden felt no victory in uncovering the truth, only a heavy sorrow for the pain it caused. Clare, standing in the middle of it all, felt the world shift beneath her feet. Everything she had believed about love, identity, and belonging dissolved into something she could barely name. And somewhere deep down, as dawn crept through the city once again, each of them understood that the truth was never just about who was related to whom. It was about the choices that defined them, the lies that protected them, and the unspoken need to be seen, to be loved, to be forgiven. Whether Sienna was truly her mother or merely a mirror of what she might have become, Clare now stood at the edge of a life that would never again be the same, and the ghosts of every decision made before her birth whispered through the walls of that hotel, binding them all to a destiny they could no longer escape. The arrival of Sienna in Los Angeles sent quiet shockwaves through the small circle of people already entangled in secrets they could barely control. Her presence didn't feel accidental, it was deliberate, carefully timed, and unsettlingly composed. Sienna had an aura of mystery that seemed to draw people in while warning them to stay away. She carried herself like a woman who had survived too much and spoken too little, her eyes heavy with knowledge she refused to share. For Holden, she was both a fascination and a threat, a living reminder that every truth comes with a price. For Clare, she was something deeper, an echo from a past she couldn't name, a reflection that grew more haunting each time their paths crossed. Sienna didn't need to say much, her silence alone was heavy enough to alter the rhythm of every conversation around her. There was something about her that felt like the key to a locked room none of them wanted to open. In Genoa City, whispers about Clare's identity had long been buried beneath the Newman name. Everyone believed she was Victoria's daughter, a young woman with a troubled past who had been given a chance at redemption through family acceptance. But behind that facade was a mission, a deception constructed with precision. Clare wasn't there to build bridges. She was there to infiltrate, to manipulate, to understand the very family that had shaped her pain. Every smile she offered, every moment of vulnerability, was carefully calculated to sustain the illusion. She played the role perfectly, even convincing herself at times that the warmth Victoria showed her might be real. But deep inside, the lie grew heavier each day. The more she played the dutiful daughter, the more she felt the sting of the truth, that she had no real place, no real mother, and no certainty about who she was. Sienna's connection to her threatened to destroy everything. If the rumors were true, if she was indeed Clare's biological mother, then the entire structure of deception surrounding the Newman family would collapse. And someone like Jordan would know. Jordan always knew. She was the type of woman who thrived on secrets, who made power out of other people's shame. If Sienna had hidden Clare's birth, Jordan had likely been the one to help bury it. Their connection went back decades, woven through old scandals, financial cover-ups, and betrayals that could ruin reputations even now. To Sienna, Jordan was both an accomplice and a curse, a witness to the one decision she regretted most. She knew that as long as Jordan lived, her secret was never safe. Holden sensed it all without needing proof. He wasn't a man easily fooled by charm or coincidence. His time with Sienna had taught him that the past always finds a way to bleed into the present, no matter how tightly it's sealed. He saw the way she avoided eye contact when Clare's name came up, the way her composure faltered whenever Victoria's presence was mentioned. He knew there was a connection there, something forbidden, something too personal to ignore. What he didn't yet know was whether revealing it would save anyone or destroy them all. The problem was that Victoria's arrival in Los Angeles changed the balance of everything. Her presence meant that every move Clare made had to be measured, every emotion masked. She couldn't risk being seen too close to Sienna or letting Holden's curiosity grow into suspicion. The facade of being Victoria's daughter demanded absolute control, and any sign of hesitation could unravel months of careful deceit. Victoria's love for her was genuine, even if it was based on a lie. That made it worse. The guilt that Clare carried began to eat away at her, and each encounter with Holden, each lingering glance that made her heart beat faster, felt like a betrayal not only of Victoria but of herself. Holden had no idea how deep the deception ran. To him, Clare was a puzzle he wanted to solve, not expose. There was a tenderness in his fascination, but it came with danger. He saw through people too easily, and that made him both desirable and terrifying to someone living a lie. Sienna recognized this pattern immediately. She had seen that same curiosity destroy lives before, and she knew Holden wouldn't stop until he uncovered the truth. That terrified her, because if he succeeded, it wouldn't just be Claire's life that fell apart, it would be hers too. Meanwhile, Jordan watched from the shadows, the invisible puppeteer of so many tragedies. She had warned Sienna long ago that hiding a child would never end well, but Sienna hadn't listened. Now, as the pieces moved into place, Jordan realized she could use this to her advantage. If Sienna was forced to confess, it would not only ruin her but shake the foundation of the Newman family. For Jordan, that was victory. She thrived on chaos, and nothing delighted her more than seeing people destroy themselves under the illusion of control. The only obstacle was Holden, whose moral compass and stubborn integrity might prevent the truth from being used as a weapon. At the hotel, Sienna and Holden crossed paths again under the soft light of the lobby. There was no warmth in her voice when she spoke, only weariness. She knew he had been watching her, and she could sense the judgment behind his eyes. Holden wasn't cruel, but he was relentless. He asked questions others were too afraid to ask, and Sienna could feel her control slipping. The memories she had locked away, the night she gave birth, the deal she made with Jordan, the promise she broke, came flooding back with painful clarity. She had spent years pretending that part of her life didn't exist, and now the ghost of that choice stood before her in the form of Clare. Clare, unaware of the full truth, was starting to unravel. The more she interacted with Sienna, the more fragments of her memory resurfaced, half-remembered lullabies, a familiar perfume, a comforting voice from her childhood she had dismissed as imagination. Holden noticed it too. He began to realize that what tied them together wasn't coincidence or attraction but blood. He started piecing it together, tracing back timelines, comparing photographs, and questioning people who once knew Sienna under a different name. Every answer led to more confusion, and yet one conclusion grew clearer: Sienna wasn't who she claimed to be, and neither was Clare. When Victoria appeared at the same hotel one afternoon, fate tightened its grip. Her relationship with Clare had reached a rare, fragile peace, and the last thing she expected was to cross paths with Sienna and Holden. The tension between the four of them was nearly unbearable. Sienna's instinct was to run, to flee before Victoria connected the dots, but Holden stayed rooted, his gaze unwavering. He realized that he could end this charade in a single sentence. The truth sat heavy on his tongue, pressing for release. But looking at Clare, her confusion, her fear, her need for belonging, he hesitated. To expose Sienna would mean destroying Clare's carefully constructed identity, shattering whatever bond she still had with Victoria, and perhaps condemning them all to public ruin. In that moment, Holden understood the terrible power of silence. He knew the truth could set them free, but it could also ruin everything it touched. His conscience tore at him, and Sienna saw it in his eyes. She begged him without words to stay quiet, and for the first time, he felt the weight of compassion overpower his sense of justice. He said nothing, and the lie survived another day. But lies have a life of their own. That night, Jordan made her move. She met with someone inside the Newman circle, whispering fragments of the truth, just enough to sow suspicion. Victoria began to sense that something was wrong, that Clare's loyalty wasn't what it seemed, that her story had too many inconsistencies. Holden, burdened by guilt, grew distant from everyone, while Sienna's fear consumed her. Clare, caught in the middle of it all, began to lose control of her carefully maintained disguise. Every glance, every question, every interaction felt like a test she might fail. When the revelation finally came, it wasn't in a dramatic confrontation but in a quiet confession. Holden, unable to bear the burden anymore, told Victoria everything he knew. He didn't name names, but he gave her enough to start connecting the dots herself. Sienna's secret could no longer be buried, and Clare's world imploded in silence. She realized that every step she had taken, every lie told to protect her mission, had only led her closer to the truth she was never meant to find. Sienna was her mother. Jordan had orchestrated her life like a cruel puppeteer. And Victoria, the woman she had grown to love, was never meant to be anything more than a pawn in a game of revenge that began long before she was born. By the time the dust settled, none of them were the same. Sienna was left with the unbearable guilt of being found out too late. Clare stood between two mothers, one who had given her life and one who had given her love, and neither relationship could ever feel whole again. Holden became the silent witness to it all, a man who had wanted to reveal the truth for justice's sake but learned that some truths destroy more than they heal. And somewhere, Jordan watched it all unfold, satisfied in her quiet victory, knowing that even when truth comes to light, it still leaves enough darkness behind to keep people broken.